The rain came down in sheets that November evening, drumming against the cracked pavement of Maple Street like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the driveway, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that had nothing to do with the cold. 20 years. 2 decades of silence. And now, this weathered blue house with its peeling paint and overgrown garden stood before her like a monument to everything she'd run from. Her hand trembled as she reached for the rusted gate. Inside, a light flickered on. She could see a shadow moving behind the curtain. Her father, the man she hadn't spoken to since she was 16 years old. The door creaked open slowly, and there he stood, older, frailer, a ghost of the towering figure who had once filled her with such terror. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried the weight of 7,300 days. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice cracking like old leather. But before we get to what happened in that doorway, before we understand the words that would finally break 2 decades of silence, you need to know why a 16-year-old girl disappeared into the night and never looked back. You need to understand what drove her to vanish so completely that even her own father couldn't find her. And you need to hear the secret that was buried for 20 long years, the truth that would change everything she thought she knew about that terrible night. If this story has already pulled you in, hit that subscribe button right now. We're diving deep into a mystery that took 2 decades to unravel, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Like this video if you're ready for the truth, and drop a comment telling me, would you have the courage to face your past after 20 years? This isn't just another runaway story. This isn't about teenage rebellion or youthful mistakes. This is about secrets that poison families from the inside out, about the lies we tell ourselves to survive, and about the devastating moment when everything you believed about your life turns out to be built on sand. Sarah Mitchell grew up in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a town so small that everybody knew everybody else's business, or at least they thought they did. The kind of place where families had lived for generations, where your reputation was currency, and where mistakes weren't just forgiven, they were remembered forever. It was 1985 when Sarah was born, and by the time she hit her teenage years in the late 90s, Millbrook hadn't changed much. The same families ran the same businesses. The same church bells rang every Sunday morning, and the same unspoken rules governed every household. In the Mitchell home, those rules were carved in stone. Robert Mitchell, Sarah's father, was a man who believed in order, discipline, and above all, appearances. He worked at the county courthouse as a clerk, a position that gave him just enough authority to feel important and just enough visibility to be paranoid about his family's reputation. Sarah's mother, Linda, had died when Sarah was 8, a car accident on Route 22 that nobody talked about because talking about pain wasn't something the Mitchells did. After that, it was just Sarah and her father in that blue house on Maple Street, and the silence between them grew thicker with each passing year. Robert Mitchell wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. He never raised a hand to his daughter, but his words could cut deeper than any blow. His expectations were impossibly high. His approval was a moving target that Sarah could never quite reach. She learned early to be invisible, to move through the house like a ghost, to excel at school not because he praised her, but because failure meant his cold, disappointed stare that made her feel like she was nothing. Don't forget to like this video if you're following along, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because this story takes turns you won't see coming. Comment below if you've ever felt invisible in your own home. By 10th grade, Sarah had become exactly what her father wanted: a perfect student, a quiet girl, someone who never caused trouble. She got straight A's. She volunteered at the library. She sang in the church choir. But perfection is a prison, and Sarah was suffocating inside it. That's when she met Danny Reeves. He wasn't from Millbrook, not really. His family had moved there the summer before sophomore year, which made him an outsider, someone who didn't carry the weight of generations of gossip and expectations. Danny was kind. He listened when she talked. He made her laugh in a way she hadn't laughed since before her mother died. They started meeting after school, walking by the creek that ran behind the old mill, talking about getting out of Millbrook someday, about cities and colleges and lives that were bigger than this small town could contain. It was innocent at first, just two lonely teenagers finding comfort in each other. But loneliness has a way of turning into something deeper, something that neither of them were prepared to handle. It happened in March of 2001, spring break of their sophomore year. Danny's parents had gone to visit relatives in Ohio. Sarah had told her father she was studying at the library. The lie came easily, because she'd never lied to him before. She'd never had a reason to. What happened that afternoon wasn't planned. It wasn't some grand romance or reckless passion. It was two scared kids trying to feel something other than lonely, trying to convince themselves that somebody cared about them. Afterwards, Sarah went home and took a shower so hot it burned her skin, trying to wash away the guilt that clung to her like oil. She told herself it was a one-time mistake. She told herself everything would go back to normal. She told herself a lot of things that turned out to be lies. 6 weeks later, Sarah sat on the bathroom floor of the Millbrook Public Library, staring at two pink lines on a pregnancy test, and felt her entire world collapse. She was 16 years old. She was pregnant. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that telling her father would destroy everything. Hit that subscribe button if you're still with me, because what happens next changed Sarah's life forever. Like this video to support these real-life stories, and comment your thoughts. What would you do in her situation? For 3 months, Sarah hid it. She wore baggy clothes. She stopped eating lunch at school, claiming she was on a diet. She avoided Danny, couldn't even look at him in the hallways because seeing him made everything too real. The guilt and fear were eating her alive from the inside out. She lost weight everywhere except her belly, which she bound with ace bandages under oversized sweatshirts. She stopped sleeping, spent her nights staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in her head. Maybe she could hide it until graduation. Maybe she could give the baby up for adoption in secret. Maybe she could just disappear, and nobody would ever have to know. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially in small towns. It was Mrs. Henderson, her English teacher, who first noticed. Sarah had fallen asleep in class, something that had never happened before. When Mrs. Henderson gently woke her and asked if everything was all right at home, Sarah burst into tears. She didn't mean to. She'd held it together for so long, kept everything locked down so tight, but Mrs. Henderson's kindness broke something open inside her, and suddenly she was sobbing in an empty classroom, unable to stop. Mrs. Henderson didn't ask questions. She just held Sarah while she cried, and then she said something that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. "Whatever you're carrying, sweetheart, it's too heavy for you to carry alone." Sarah almost told her. Almost. But then she thought about her father finding out, about the disappointment in his eyes, about becoming the scandal that Millbrook would talk about for years, and she swallowed the truth back down. That night, Sarah came home to find her father sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in his hand. Her heart stopped. It was from the school counselor, suggesting a meeting to discuss Sarah's recent behavioral changes and emotional distress. Robert Mitchell's face was carved from stone. "Sit down," he said, and Sarah sat. "What's going on with you?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. This was her chance. This was the moment to tell him, to ask for help, to trust that underneath his rigid exterior, there might be a father who loved his daughter more than he loved appearances. Sarah opened her mouth. The truth sat right there on her tongue. But when she looked at her father's cold, expectant eyes, all she could see was judgment. All she could hear was his voice from 100 different moments. "What will people think? We're better than this. I didn't raise you to be common." Make sure you're subscribed because the story is about to take a dark turn. Like, if you're feeling the tension, and comment, "Have you ever been too scared to tell someone the truth?" "Nothing's wrong," Sarah lied. "I'm just stressed about exams." Robert stared at her for a long moment, then crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. "Then handle it," he said. "I don't want another letter like this. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Sarah whispered. That night, she lay in bed and felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings against the inside of her ribs, and she realized with horrible clarity that she was running out of time. By early June, Sarah was 4.5 months pregnant, and hiding it was becoming impossible. School was out for the summer, which helped, but she couldn't avoid her father forever. She couldn't keep wearing winter clothes in the heat. She couldn't explain why she was throwing up every morning. The walls were closing in. And then one evening, everything fell apart. Sarah had just gotten out of the shower when she realized she'd left her towel in her bedroom. She wrapped herself in the small hand towel from the bathroom and ran across the hall, not thinking, not careful. Robert was coming up the stairs. He saw her. And in that moment, with water dripping down her skin and nothing to hide behind, he saw the truth that she'd been desperately concealing. The look on his face was something Sarah would never forget. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was shock, then confusion, then dawning horror as understanding crashed over him like a wave. "No," he said, the word barely a whisper. "No, Sarah. Tell me that's not what I think it is." Sarah tried to cover herself, tried to run to her room, but her father grabbed her arm. "Sarah, answer me. Are you pregnant?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as lead. And in that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what she said, everything had already changed. "Yes," she whispered. What happened next was worse than any nightmare Sarah had imagined. Her father didn't yell. He didn't hit her. He just stared at her like she was something disgusting he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. Then he let go of her arm and walked away, down the stairs, out the back door, into the yard. Sarah got dressed with shaking hands and waited. She waited for him to come back inside. She waited for the yelling, the punishment, the consequences. But when Robert Mitchell finally came back inside an hour later, his face was eerily calm. Subscribe if you want to know what happened in that house that night. Like this video, and comment your prediction. What do you think her father said? "Sit down," he said again, and again Sarah sat. Robert folded his hands on the table like he was about to conduct a business meeting. His voice was cold, controlled, completely devoid of emotion. "Who's the father?" Sarah couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up. "I asked you a question. Who did this to you?" "Danny," she managed to whisper. "Danny Reeves." "The Reeves boy," Robert said, nodding slowly. "Does he know?" Sarah shook her head. "Does anyone else know?" Another shake. "Good," Robert said, and something about the way he said it made Sarah's blood run cold. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay in this house. You're not going to see anyone or talk to anyone. In 2 months, we're going to tell people you're going to live with my sister in Ohio. We'll find a place that handles these situations, and you're going to give the baby up for adoption. Then you're going to come back here, finish school, and we're never going to talk about this again. Do you understand?" Sarah stared at her father in disbelief. "Dad, do you understand?" he repeated, his voice rising for the first time. "You've disgraced this family. You've thrown away everything I've worked for, everything we are. The Mitchell name means something in this town, and you've dragged it through the mud. But I'll be damned if I let you make this worse. You'll do exactly as I say, and maybe, we can salvage something from this disaster." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for this to happen. Sorry doesn't change anything," Robert said flatly. "You made your choice. Now you live with the consequences. But you'll live with them my way." He stood up from the table. "Go to your room. I need to make some calls." Sarah went upstairs, her whole body numb. She sat on her bed and stared at the walls covered with her achievement certificates, her honor roll ribbons, her perfect attendance awards. All those years of trying to be good enough, and it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. She was just a problem to be solved, a stain to be erased. Around midnight, Sarah made her decision. She couldn't stay. She couldn't let her father hide her away like a shameful secret. She couldn't give up her baby to strangers and pretend it never happened. She had to leave. She waited until 3 a.m, when she was certain her father was asleep. She packed one small backpack with clothes, grabbed the $217 she'd saved from babysitting jobs, and climbed out her bedroom window onto the porch roof, just like she'd done a dozen times before to meet Danny. Make sure to hit subscribe because Sarah's journey is just beginning. Like this video and tell me in the comments, would you have run or would you have stayed? But this time, she wasn't coming back. Sarah walked through the empty streets of Millbrook as the sky began to lighten with dawn. She walked past the library where she'd spent so many afternoons. Past the school where she'd earned her straight A's. Past the church where she'd sung in the choir. Past Danny's house where a light was on in the kitchen and she could see his mother making coffee, normal life continuing like nothing was wrong. She kept walking. She walked all the way to Route 22, stuck out her thumb, and caught a ride with a trucker heading east. The last thing she saw of Millbrook was the welcome sign in the rearview mirror, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared. That was June 18th, 2001. Sarah Mitchell was 16 years old, 4.5 months pregnant, and completely alone. It would be 20 years before she came back. The first weeks after Sarah disappeared were a blur of shelters, bus stations, and cheap motels. She called her father once from a payphone in Harrisburg, just to let him know she was alive. He picked up on the first ring, like he'd been waiting by the phone. "Come home," he said, his voice tight. "We'll figure this out." "No," Sarah said. "I can't. I'm sorry." "Sarah, you're 16 years old. You can't survive out there alone. Be reasonable." "I have to go," she whispered and hung up. She never called again. Sarah ended up in Philadelphia by the end of June, living in a shelter for runaway youth on Broad Street. The social workers there were kind but overworked. They asked questions she didn't want to answer. They talked about contacting her family, about school, about her options. Sarah lied and said she was 18, that she'd aged out of foster care, that she had no family. They didn't push too hard. They'd seen too many kids with stories like hers. In August, Sarah gave birth to a baby girl in a county hospital. She was 17 by then, though barely. The labor was 36 hours long, and Sarah did it alone. No family in the waiting room, no hand to hold, just the nurses' rotating shifts and a young resident who looked almost as scared as she felt. When they placed the baby in her arms, Sarah looked down at that tiny, wrinkled face and felt something crack open in her chest. Love, fierce and overwhelming and terrifying. She named her Emma, after her mother's middle name, the one connection to her past that she allowed herself to keep. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button. We post real stories that matter. Like this video if Sarah's strength is inspiring you, and comment, what would you name your baby if you were in her situation? The next 18 years were a testament to survival. Sarah worked 3 jobs at one point, waitressing at a diner, cleaning offices at night, and taking in sewing on weekends. She and Emma lived in a series of tiny apartments in neighborhoods that got worse before they got better. Sarah got her GED, then slowly, painfully, took community college classes one at a time, studying late at night after Emma went to sleep. She couldn't afford to fail. Couldn't afford to slip. She had a daughter, depending on her. Emma grew up knowing that her mom had left home young, that they didn't have family nearby, but not why. Sarah couldn't bring herself to explain. How do you tell your daughter that her grandfather considered her a disgrace before she was even born? That you ran away in the night rather than let him erase her existence? So Sarah said nothing, and Emma stopped asking. But the silence around their past sat between them like a third person in their tiny apartment. Back in Millbrook, rumors swirled. Some people said Sarah had been kidnapped. Others whispered about drugs, about running off with a boy, about things too scandalous to say out loud. Robert Mitchell told people his daughter had gone to live with relatives, then later that she was traveling, then finally he stopped explaining at all. He hired a private investigator, but Sarah had covered her tracks well. She used cash. She moved frequently. She stayed off the grid. Robert never found her. What Sarah didn't know, couldn't know during those long years, was what her disappearance had done to her father. Robert Mitchell had always been a hard man, but after Sarah left, something in him broke. He stopped going to church. He let the house fall into disrepair. He became, in the words of his neighbors, difficult. He snapped at people at work. He withdrew from friends. He was a man haunted by something he couldn't talk about. Every year on Sarah's birthday, Robert would sit in her old bedroom, which he'd left exactly as it was the night she disappeared, and he would cry. Nobody in Millbrook knew this. They just saw a bitter old man getting more bitter. They didn't see the guilt eating him alive from the inside out. The years crawled by. Emma started school, then middle school, then high school. Sarah watched her daughter grow into a smart, strong, independent young woman and felt pride mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. She'd done it. She'd survived. She'd raised her daughter alone. But the past wouldn't leave her alone. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and Emma was asleep, Sarah would lie awake and wonder about her father. Was he still alive? Did he ever think about her? Had he spent the last 20 years hating her for running away, or had he understood, even a little, why she had to go? Don't forget to subscribe to hear how this story ends. Like if you're invested in Sarah's journey, and comment, do you think her father regretted his actions? The call came in March of 2021, exactly 20 years after that afternoon when everything changed. Sarah was 36 years old, working as an office manager for a small architecture firm in Philadelphia. Emma was at college in New York, studying journalism, living the life Sarah had once dreamed of for herself. Sarah had finally started to feel like maybe she'd outrun her past. Then her phone rang. The number had a Pennsylvania area code she recognized instantly, even after all these years. Her hand shook as she answered. "Hello. Is this Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was female, older, unfamiliar. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Margaret Brennan. I'm a nurse at Millbrook Memorial Hospital. Your father, Robert Mitchell, is here. He's had a stroke." The world tilted sideways. Sarah sat down hard on her office chair. Is he going to be okay?" "He's stable, but he's asked for you. He's been asking for you since he woke up. He says he needs to talk to you, that he has something important to tell you. Do you think you could come?" Sarah's first instinct was to hang up, to pretend she'd never gotten the call, to protect herself from the man who had driven her away 20 years ago. But then Margaret said something that changed everything. "He's been carrying your photograph in his wallet," the nurse said softly. "It's worn so thin you can barely see the image anymore. I think he's been waiting for you for a very long time." 3 days later, Sarah stood outside that weathered blue house on Maple Street, rain drumming against the pavement, her hand trembling on the gate. The house looked smaller than she remembered. The garden was overgrown. The paint was peeling. It looked abandoned, even though she knew her father was inside, home from the hospital, waiting for her. She'd called ahead. He knew she was coming. The door opened before she could knock, and there he was. Robert Mitchell at 72 looked nothing like the imposing figure from her memories. He was thin, frail, moving with the careful shuffle of someone who'd been recently ill. His hair was completely white. His face was deeply lined. But his eyes, those eyes that had looked at her with such disappointment 20 years ago, were filled with tears. "Sarah," he whispered, and the way he said her name, like it was something precious he'd been forbidden to speak out loud, made her throat close up. Hit subscribe if you're feeling the emotion of this moment. Like this video and comment. Could you forgive someone after 20 years? They stood there in the doorway, rain falling behind her, neither of them moving. 20 years of silence stretched between them like a canyon. "Can I come in?" Sarah finally asked. Robert nodded and stepped aside. The house smelled the same, like old wood and coffee, and something else Sarah couldn't quite name. Memory, maybe. Robert led her to the living room, moving slowly, and they sat down on opposite ends of the couch, a careful distance between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Robert said, "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. The nurse said you needed to talk to me." "I do. I've needed to talk to you for 20 years. He took a shaky breath. "But I need to start by saying I'm sorry." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them back. She wasn't ready to cry. Not yet. "I'm sorry for how I reacted that night," Robert continued, his voice rough. "I'm sorry for the things I said to you. I'm sorry for making you feel like you had to run away in the middle of the night. I'm sorry for—" His voice broke, and he covered his face with his hands. Sarah sat frozen, watching her father fall apart. She'd never seen him cry before. Not once in her entire childhood. Not even at her mother's funeral. I drove you away, Robert sobbed. I drove away my little girl because I was more worried about what people would think than about what you needed. What kind of father does that? Dad, Sarah whispered, but he shook his head. Let me finish.
Please.
I've been practicing this for 20 years. He lowered his hands and looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. I need to tell you something I've never told anyone. Something I've carried with me my whole life. Sarah's heart was pounding. This was it. This was the moment the nurse had called her about. The important thing her father needed to say. Robert stood up slowly and walked to a desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph, yellowed with age, and brought it back to the couch. He handed it to Sarah with shaking hands. The photograph showed a young man, maybe 19 or 20, standing next to a pretty girl in a sundress. They were smiling at the camera, the young man's arm around the girl's waist. It took Sarah a moment to recognize that the young man was her father. Make sure you're subscribed because the truth is about to be revealed. Like this video if you're on the edge of your seat and comment your theories. What's the secret? That's Jennifer, Robert said quietly. We were together in 1971. I was 20, working at my father's hardware store. She was a year younger, working at the diner on Main Street. We were in love, or at least I thought we were. He paused, staring at the photograph. She got pregnant that summer. Sarah's breath caught. What? She told me in August. I panicked. I was young and stupid and terrified. My father was already disappointed in me for not going to college. I couldn't imagine telling him I'd gotten a girl pregnant. So his voice cracked again. I told Jennifer to get rid of it. When she said she wouldn't, that she wanted to keep the baby, I told her we were done. I said I wouldn't be part of her life or the baby's life. And then I ran. I moved to Pittsburgh, got a job, stayed away for 2 years. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. What happened to her? She had the baby.
A boy.
She raised him alone. Her family helped, but it was hard. Everyone knew I'd abandoned her. I came back to Millbrook when my father died, met your mother, tried to build a new life. But Jennifer was still here, still raising our son. I saw them sometimes around town. I never spoke to them, never acknowledged them. I was too ashamed. Robert looked at Sarah with anguished eyes. So, when you told me you were pregnant, when I saw you standing there at 16 years old, terrified and alone, I didn't see my daughter. I saw myself. I saw the coward who ran away. And I couldn't face it. I couldn't face what I'd done to Jennifer. So instead, I did to you exactly what I'd done to her. I tried to hide you away, to erase the mistake, to pretend it never happened. The room was spinning. Sarah couldn't breathe. You have a son? I did. He died 3 years ago. Car accident. I found out from the newspaper. I didn't even know his name until I read his obituary. Robert's whole body was shaking. Michael. His name was Michael. He was 48 years old. He was a teacher. He had 2 kids of his own. And I never met him. Never spoke to him. Never told him I was sorry. Sarah was crying openly now, huge, gulping sobs that shook her entire body. Why didn't you tell me this before? Why did you let me think I was the one who disappointed you? Subscribe to see how this family confronts the past. Like this video and comment. Was this confession enough? Because I'm a coward, Robert said simply. I've always been a coward. When you ran away, I tried to find you. I hired investigators. I called every shelter and hospital in Pennsylvania. But you were gone, and part of me knew you had to be gone, that you'd never be able to heal if I was in your life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn wallet, then extracted a thin, faded photograph. It was Sarah's 10th grade school picture, so worn that her features were barely visible. I've carried this with me every single day, for 20 years. Every morning when I got dressed, I'd put it in my wallet. Every night when I went to bed, I'd take it out and look at it. And I'd pray that wherever you were okay, that you were happy, that you'd found the life I couldn't give you. Sarah took the photograph with trembling hands. She could barely see her own face anymore. The paper was soft as cloth from being handled so many times. When I had the stroke, Robert continued, I thought I was dying. And all I could think was that I was going to die without ever telling you the truth. Without ever apologizing. Without ever meeting your child. Sarah's head snapped up. How did you know I kept the baby? Because you're stronger than I ever was. Because you're your mother's daughter, not mine. And because I knew that you wouldn't make the same mistake I did. You wouldn't run from your child. You'd run toward them. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the rain was starting to let up. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds. Her name is Emma, Sarah said finally. She's 19. She's at NYU studying journalism. She's smart and funny and kind, and she's the best thing that ever happened to me. Robert closed his eyes, tears sliding down his cheeks. I'd like to meet her. If you'd let me. I know I don't deserve it. I know I gave up that right 20 years ago. But if you'd give me a chance to. She doesn't know about you, Sarah interrupted. She doesn't know about Millbrook or why I left. I've never told her. Why not? Because I didn't want her to carry my pain. I didn't want her to grow up knowing she was unwanted by her grandfather before she was even born. Make sure to subscribe for the powerful conclusion to this story. Like this video if you're emotionally invested and comment, should Sarah tell Emma the truth? Robert flinched like he'd been struck. Sarah, I did not want her. I didn't want the scandal. I didn't want to face what it meant about me. But I never, not for 1 second, wished she didn't exist. Then why didn't you find us? You had 20 years. I tried. God, I tried. But after a while, I realized that maybe you were better off without me. Maybe Emma was better off not knowing that her grandfather was the kind of man who could drive his daughter away. Maybe some things are too broken to fix. Sarah looked at her father, really looked at him for the first time since she'd arrived. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight of decades of guilt, the desperate hope that maybe, it wasn't too late. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said quietly. I don't know if Emma will want to meet you. I don't know if we can ever be a family again. I know, Robert whispered. But I had to tell you the truth. I had to let you know that when I pushed you away, it wasn't because of anything you did wrong. It was because of who I was. Who I'd always been. A man running from his own mistakes. Sarah stood up. She needed air. She needed space. She needed time to process everything she'd just learned. I have to go. Robert nodded, not even trying to make her stay. I understand. Sarah walked to the door, then stopped with her hand on the knob. She turned back. Did you ever apologize to Jennifer? To Michael? Robert shook his head. Michael died before I got the courage. And Jennifer, I don't even know if she's still alive. I'm too much of a coward to find out. That's the difference between us then, Sarah said. Because I came back. I found the courage to face you. And maybe that's what you need to do too. Maybe it's time to stop running. She opened the door and stepped out into the damp evening air. Behind her, she heard her father call out, Sarah? She turned. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain. Even if you never want to see me again, thank you for that. Sarah nodded, unable to speak, and walked away. She made it to her rental car before she started sobbing, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, 20 years of pain and anger and grief pouring out of her all at once. Hit that subscribe button because there's more to Sarah's story. Like this video and comment. Do you think reconciliation is possible after this much pain? She sat there for a long time, crying in the fading light, until her phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. Hey Mom, just checking in. Hope your trip is going okay. Love you. Sarah stared at the message, then looked back at the house where her father stood silhouetted in the window, watching her. She thought about the photograph he'd carried for 20 years, about the son he'd never known, about the mistakes that echo through generations. And she thought about Emma, brilliant, beautiful Emma, who deserved to know where she came from, even if the truth was complicated and messy and painful. Sarah typed back, Love you too, sweetheart. Can we talk tonight? There's something I need to tell you about your family. She put the phone down and sat for another moment, gathering her courage. Then she started the car and pulled away from Maple Street, watching the blue house disappear in her rearview mirror. But this time, she knew she'd come back. This time, running away wasn't the answer. 3 weeks later, Sarah returned to Millbrook with Emma. She told her daughter everything in a series of long, difficult conversations. The pregnancy, the confrontation, the flight, her father's confession. All of it. Emma had been shocked, then angry, then thoughtful. "I want to meet him," she'd finally said. "I want to know my grandfather, even if he's not perfect. Even if he's made terrible mistakes. Because you made the choice to keep me, Mom, and I turned out okay. Maybe he deserves a chance to try." So they came back. Robert opened the door, looking older and more nervous than Sarah had ever seen him, and found himself face to face with his granddaughter for the first time. Emma looked just like Sarah had at that age, but with a confidence Sarah had never possessed. "Hi," Emma said, extending her hand. "I'm Emma. It's complicated, but I'm glad to finally meet you." Robert took her hand in both of his, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so glad to meet you too. And I'm so sorry for everything." "I know," Emma said. "Mom told me. But maybe we can start from here.
Right now.
Today." They went inside, and for the first time in 20 years, the Mitchell house was filled with something other than silence. They talked for hours. Robert told stories about Sarah's mother that Sarah had never heard. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now. We share stories about real families and real struggles. Like this video if you believe in second chances and comment. Have you ever reconnected with family after years apart?